The man in the wrong shoes, morning sun had barely stretched over the horizon when Sundar Pichai walked out of his modest Los Altos home, sipping chai from a ceramic cup his daughter had painted in art class. He looked calm, thoughtful, wearing a simple gray hoodie, worn jeans, and a pair of dusty blue sneakers with a hand-sewn patch on the side. They weren't fancy. They weren't new, but they were special to him. The shoes had belonged to his late father. Sundar had worn them every year on his father's birthday, a quiet way to keep his memory alive. As he opened the gate and stepped into the sleek black car waiting for him. He had no idea that today those very shoes would become the center of a storm, the kind that doesn't just shake reputations, it tests everything you are. The car pulled up outside a grand, glass-wrapped building in San Francisco. Inside was the venue for a prestigious global innovation summit. CEOs, world leaders, inventors, and billionaires from every continent were gathering for what the media had dubbed the Future of Humanity Summit. Sundar was scheduled to give the keynote speech. But as he stepped out of the car and walked toward the velvet rope entrance, his calm was instantly pierced. At the doorway stood a cluster of sharply dressed executives, influencers, and fashion-forward media figures. The cameras snapped, the microphones were hot, and every step Sundar took was watched. But it wasn't admiration filling their eyes, it was something colder. Judgment. A tall man in a black designer suit with slick back hair and sunglasses leaned toward a woman in a silk jumpsuit and laughed, not caring if Sundar heard. Are those thrift store shoes? He smirked. Did he walk here from the 90s? The woman giggled too loud. He's worth billions and can't afford Louboutin? Poor Google. Maybe they're cutting costs again. Sundar heard every word. But he didn't slow down. He simply nodded at the security guard, gave a small smile to the press cameras, and kept walking. It wasn't the first time people had judged him for being simple. He had always believed substance would outshine spectacle, but today felt different. This wasn't quite misunderstanding. This was mockery. Inside the summit hall. Bright chandeliers hung like constellations above a sea of designer suits and glittering gowns. Sundar walked in quietly, his presence barely noticed. That is, until another comment floated through the air. He's wearing a hoodie, someone whispered behind a hand. To an event with world leaders? This isn't Silicon Valley casual. It's disrespect. An assistant to one of the hosts tried to intercept him. Mr. Pichai, we can provide you with a jacket from our guest suite. Or perhaps some formal shoes? We weren't aware you'd be dressing like this. Sundar paused, gently placing his cup on a side table. He looked at the young woman and said softly, I'm comfortable. Thank you for the offer. Her face flushed. Of course. Just thought you'd want to match the tone of the room. He nodded politely and walked away, but the whispers didn't stop. If anything, they multiplied throughout the morning. Speaker after speaker came to the stage wearing tailored suits, custom jewelry, and luxury watches that cost more than most homes. They talked about global challenges, the need for change, for compassion, for simplicity, all while sipping champagne and flaunting brands. When Sundar's name was finally called, there was an audible shift in the room. A mix of curiosity, skepticism, and something worse, amusement. He stepped onto the stage slowly, the spotlight landing on his scuffed shoes and frayed hoodie. A few people chuckled. A billionaire influencer even tweeted mid-event, next time, Sundar needs a stylist. Happy to help. #homeless-kick. But Sundar didn't flinch. He stood at the podium, looked out at the room, and took a moment before speaking. Then, in a calm, firm voice, he said, I'd like to start with a story. It begins with a man who used to walk 4 miles to work every day because he couldn't afford a bicycle. The room went quiet. He wore the same shoes for 15 years. Not because he didn't want better, but because they worked. Because they got him there and back. And because he had kids to feed. A hush fell over the audience. That man was my father. And these, he paused, stepping back slightly to show the shoes. Are his shoes? patched by my mother, kept by me, and worn today not to make a statement, but to remind myself of where I came from. His voice trembled just slightly. We're here today to talk about the future of humanity. But if we cannot carry our past with dignity, if we cannot wear our stories with pride, then we have no foundation to stand on. A few people shifted. In their seats, phones that had been used to mock were now silently recording. I'm not against wealth, Sundar continued. But wealth should never erase humility, and innovation should never forget humanity. His words landed like thunder in a room that had forgotten silence. By the end of his speech, there wasn't a single whisper left. Just silence, thick and heavy. And as he stepped down from the stage, something shifted. One by one, people began to stand. Slow at first, then in waves. A standing ovation. The same man who mocked him at the door now clapped, eyes wide with guilt. But the real twist came an hour later, when Sundar was already back in his car, quietly driving home. A young journalist from Singapore posted a short clip of Sundar's speech on social media. It wasn't fancy. Just Sundar, talking about his father's shoes. Within 20 minutes, it had 2 million views. By the end of the day, it had crossed 50 million. And the hashtag shoes of Sundar began trending globally. But something else happened, something no one saw coming. A popular streetwear brand, without permission, uploaded a photo of Sundar's patched shoes and announced a limited edition inspired by them. Other brands followed. Influencers, once silent, now began praising the story behind the shoes. Orders flooded in. People around the world wanted those shoes, not for fashion, but for what they stood for. And somewhere in a quiet home in India, Sundar's mother, now in her 80s, watched the video of her son speaking. She pressed her hand to her chest, tears rolling down her cheeks, not for the applause, not for the sales, but because the world had finally seen the man she raised. But as the sun set and the world celebrated, Sundar got a message that made his heart stop. A private message from someone he hadn't seen in 20 years. Someone who had once betrayed him deeply. To read, I saw your speech. We need to talk. It's about your father. It's important. Sundar stared at the screen, the world around him spinning. Because the message was from his estranged brother, and he had no idea what was coming next. Asterisk the letter in the attic. Car rolled silently through the oak-lined streets of Los Altos Hills as Sundar sat in the back seat. The world outside moving, but his thoughts frozen. His phone screen was still lit up with that message. 5 simple words that shattered years of silence. We need to talk. It's about your father. And the name attached to it, like a ghost from the past. Arjun Pichai. For a moment, Sundar didn't breathe. Arjun hadn't reached out in 2 decades. Not after their final argument. Not after their mother begged them to reconcile. And certainly not after their father passed. Sundar had buried more than just pain back then. He had buried trust. He remembered the last thing he had said to Arjun. It wasn't kind. And Arjun's silence ever since had felt like a confirmation that some things, no matter how deep the bond, cannot be repaired. Now his brother wanted to talk. And it was about their father. Back home, Sundar didn't step out of the car immediately. He sat there staring out at the garden his father once planted. The jasmine vines were blooming again, filling the air with a soft, nostalgic sweetness. It reminded him of the mornings when their father used to water the plants before sunrise, sometimes barefoot, always humming that same old Tamil song. Sundar finally stepped out, walked to the porch, and stood still for a while. His daughter peeked from the window, then ran to the door. "Ah, Pa," she smiled. "Did you win the award?" He smiled back, soft and tired. "I didn't go to win." She tilted her head. "But everyone's talking about your shoes," Mama said. "They're famous now." Sundar knelt down beside her, brushing a curl from her cheek. "They belong to your grandfather. And he was the real reason I went." She hugged him without another word, and he held on just a little longer than usual. After dinner, long after the children were asleep and the house had gone quiet, Sundar sat alone in his study. The room was filled with books, old notebooks. and framed memories, but his eyes were locked on his phone screen. He hadn't replied to Arjun yet. Finally, he typed, "What do you want to say?" The reply came almost instantly. "Not here. Come to Chennai. Come to the house. There's something you need to see. Something Appa left for you." That last sentence hit like a punch to the chest. Something their father left for him. How was that possible? Sundar leaned back in his chair, staring at the shadows dancing on the ceiling. The memories came rushing back, his father sitting at the old desk, writing late into the night with a dim lamp glowing. Arjun and Sundar arguing in the kitchen. The smell of fried lentils and turmeric. The silence after their father's funeral. And the attic no one had touched since 2 days later. Sundar landed quietly in Chennai, unannounced. No media. No entourage, just him in a black backpack. The air was thick with humidity, and the streets bustled with a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. Every honk, every voice, every distant temple bell, it all brought him back. The auto rickshaw dropped him near the old house. It hadn't changed much. Paint peeling, windows still the same, the banyan tree in the corner now larger and leaning over the gate like a guardian. He walked through the rusted gate slowly, each step stirring dust and memory. Arjun opened the door before he could knock. He looked older, leaner, tired. His beard was peppered with gray, and his eyes, though guarded, softened when he saw Sundar. "You came," Arjun said quietly. "You asked?" Sundar replied for a moment. Neither said anything. The air between them was thick with everything unspoken. "Come in," Arjun said, stepping aside. Inside. The house smelled of old wood and incense. The furniture was exactly where it used to be. The clock still ticked the same. Time, it seemed, had stood still here. "I didn't touch anything," Arjun said as they entered the living room. "Not even his chair." Sundar looked at the old wooden chair near the window, a white towel draped neatly over the back. It was where their father used to read the newspaper every morning. "Why now?" Sundar asked. Arjun didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned for Sundar to follow him up the narrow stairs to the attic. It was dark, dusty, and untouched. He flicked on a single bulb that hung from a frayed wire. It lit up the room just enough to see the old trunks, cobwebs, and books stacked in corners. "I came up here a week ago," Arjun said, his voice echoing slightly. "I was looking for some of his files, and I found this." He pointed to a wooden trunk. The lock was broken, but carefully placed on top. Sundar knelt down and opened it. Inside were neatly folded clothes, a few notebooks, and an envelope. The envelope had Sundar's name written on it in their father's careful handwriting. His hands trembled as he picked it up. "I didn't read it," Arjun said softly. "It had your name." Sundar opened it slowly. The paper inside yellowed and delicate. He unfolded it and began to read. "My dear Sundar, if you're reading this, then I am no longer there to say these words. I do not know when you will find this, or even if... But if you do, know that everything I did was to give you and Arjun a better life. You were always the quiet one, thoughtful, watching the world. Even as a boy, you listened more than you spoke, but you carried burdens you never shared. And I saw it all. Even when you thought I didn't, these shoes you wear, they carried me through my life. But I kept them for you, not because of the journeys they took me on, but because I wanted you to remember your roots no matter how far you flew. Fear I left things unsettled between you and Arjun. It breaks my heart to think my sons may walk separate roads forever. If there's one final thing I wish for, it is not glory, not wealth, but for you to forgive each other. Just sit in the same room as you are now, and remember that family is worth more than pride. In this trunk, you will find something else, something neither of you knew. Take it together. And promise me you'll walk forward, not alone, but side by side. With love, Appa. Tears welled up in Sundar's eyes. He didn't speak. He just sat there, the letter shaking in his hands. Arjun crouched beside him and opened a second smaller envelope from the same trunk. Inside were 2 plane tickets, both dated 12 years ago. One in Sundar's name, one in Arjun's. He was going to take us on a trip, Arjun whispered. He never told us. He died that year. Sundar felt something heavy crumble inside. I blamed you, Arjun continued. When you got sick, you were away. I thought you didn't care. But I see now. You were carrying something else. Something none of us understood. They sat there in silence, two brothers. A letter. And 20 years of silence between them until Arjun spoke again. You're still wearing the shoes, he said. Sundar looked down. They're part of me now. I think it's time the world knew what they really meant. Just then, Sundar's phone buzzed. A call from his assistant. He didn't answer. But the message that followed made his eyes widen. A major international fashion label, one of the same brands whose executives had mocked. He had just released a statement. We are inspired by Sundar Pichai's authenticity and values. We are canceling our luxury launch this year and will instead create a collection honoring everyday heroes. All proceeds will go toward education programs in underserved communities. And then came another message from the editor of a global fashion magazine. We'd like to do a full cover story. Not about wealth, but about meaning. About the shoes, the story, and what they represent. Sundar looked at Arjun. The world wants to talk, he said. Arjun smiled for the first time that day. Then maybe we have more to say. But before they could leave the attic, Arjun reached behind the trunk and pulled out an old wooden box. There's one more thing, he said, handing it over. Something Appa hid, something I only found last night. Sundar opened it slowly. Inside was a faded photograph. But what he saw made his breath stop, because the man in the photo standing beside their father was a face Sundar knew well. It was the billionaire who mocked him at the summit. And behind the photo was a note, scribbled, hurried, and incomplete. If anything happens to me, he knows why. Sundar looked up at Arjun, his heart pounding. What is this? He asked. Arjun's voice was low. I think Appa was hiding something much bigger than we ever imagined. Asterisk shadows. Of the past, room was silent except for the sound of Sundar's breath, shallow and uneven, as he stared at the photo. The edges were worn, almost disintegrating at the corners, but the image was unmistakable. His father back straight, eyes steady, wearing the same khaki shirt he always wore when he meant business, was standing beside a much younger version of the man who had mocked Sundar at the summit just days ago, Arian Wexler, the billionaire CEO of the fashion empire Vortex International. In the photo, both men appeared outside an old textile mill. Behind them, workers bustled with bales of cotton, machines hummed in mid-motion, and there was something strange about the way Arian was smiling, calculated, almost rehearsed. But it wasn't the photo alone that chilled Sundar. It was the note written in his father's handwriting, shaky, rushed, possibly his last days alive. If anything happens to me, he knows why. 1,000 questions stormed Sundar's mind at once, louder than logic. What did his father mean? What connection did he have with a man who had become a global fashion tycoon? And why had that man looked him in the eye at the summit, laughed at his shoes, and walked away, completely unaware that the man he mocked knew a buried secret from long ago? Or did he know? Where did you find this? Sundar's voice was barely a whisper. His eyes still locked on the photograph. Arjun took a breath, heavy with the weight of memory. Under the floorboards in the attic. I only found it by accident. One of the planks creaked differently. I pulled it up and the box was hidden beneath. Sundar ran his fingers along the photo, then the note. Do you remember this place? He asked. Arjun nodded slowly. That's the old textile mill Appa used to audit for the government. In Thiruvalur. He used to visit there every few months. In the late 90s. Did he ever mention Arian Wexler? Never. Not once. They sat in silence for a moment. The attic now feeling less like a memory box and more like a vault of secrets. You know what this means? Sundar finally said, double quotes, yes. Arjun replied, you can't ignore this. I won't. Sundar stood slowly, folding the note carefully and slipping it into his pocket. He held the photo for a moment longer before tucking it into his backpack. I'm going to Thiruvalur. Arjun's brows lifted. Now. Tomorrow. Do you want me to come? Sundar hesitated, then nodded. Yes. If Appa wanted us to face this together, we should. The next morning, under a sky smeared with soft gray clouds, the brothers drove out of Chennai in a quiet rented car. The road to Thiruvalur was narrow and winding, flanked by rice paddies and small temples. Every few kilometers, a tea shop or banana vendor passed by, and the countryside felt like a forgotten lullaby. They didn't speak much. The silence wasn't cold. It was necessary. Both were lost in thought, hearts wrapped in memories, minds tangled in speculation. After nearly 2 hours, they reached the outskirts of Thiruvalur, where the old textile mill still stood, or what remained of it. The gate was rusted shut. Vines had grown over the boundary wall. A faded board read, Sri Meena Textiles, Est, 1973. The place had clearly been abandoned for years. They parked near a tree and walked through a hole in the wall, squeezing past the creeping thorns and old iron. Inside, the silence was thick and ghostly. Broken machines lay scattered across the factory floor, metal beams bent from the weight of time. It was like stepping into a graveyard of forgotten labor. I used to come here with him, Arjun said softly. I wait in the car while you went in with files. He always looked tense after these trips. They moved through the dark corridors, flashlights guiding their way. Eventually, they reached what looked like an old office. Its door was off its hinges, lying on the floor, and the inside was covered in dust. But something caught Sundar's eye. An old filing cabinet, half buried beneath debris, dot together. They pulled it free. Inside were dozens of yellowed documents. Audit reports, financial ledgers, handwritten notes in Tamil and English. Most of it was mundane until they found it. A letter. Not signed by their father, but addressed to him, typed on Vortex International. Letterhead. Mr. Pichai, we appreciate your discretion in reviewing the documents related to our acquisition of Sri Meena Textiles. We trust your report will reflect the agreed-upon understanding of the working conditions and labor practices therein. Should any concerns arise, we expect your full cooperation in keeping such matters private. A. Wexler, CEO. Sundar's jaw clenched. This wasn't an audit. It was a cover-up. Arjun nodded, his expression dark. Vortex bought the mill. Probably used cheap labor, maybe even underage workers. Appa must have discovered it and refused to stay quiet. Which means he didn't just die of illness, Sundar said, voice low. Something scared him. Enough to write that note. They both fell silent again. What started as a story about shoes had suddenly unraveled into a legacy their father never intended to leave behind. A legacy of buried truth and power used to silence those who spoke against it. Why didn't we know? Arjun whispered. Maybe he wanted to protect us, Sundar replied. But now it's our turn to protect his name. Later that night, back in Chennai, Sundar opened his laptop and began typing. Not an email, not a press release, but a personal post. He wrote about the summit, the shoes, his father, and what he had discovered. He didn't mention Aryan Wexler's name. Not yet, but he ended the post with one line that sent waves across the internet. If the world wants to wear my father's shoes, then they must also walk his path. Within hours, the post had over 10 million views. People weren't just buying the shoes anymore, they were asking questions. Who was Sundar's father? What did he stand for? What happened at the textile mill? Investigative journalists began digging. Online forums lit up. Documentaries were proposed, but not everyone was happy. The next morning, Sundar received an email from Vortex International's legal team. A cease and desist. He read it quietly, then showed it to Arjun. They're scared, Arjun said. They should be. But the email wasn't the only thing waiting. A black car had been parked outside the hotel since sunrise. And when Sundar walked out to get some air, a man stepped out of the vehicle. Tall, crisp black suit, clean-shaven, and unmistakable. Aryan Wexler. He walked towards Sundar with a smirk that hadn't aged a day. You've made quite the mess, Pichai, he said, voice smooth like polished steel. Sundar didn't flinch. I'm just telling the truth. Truth is subjective, Aryan replied, especially when it's missing pieces. Like the truth you buried in Thiruvalur? Aryan's smile faltered for a split second. Careful, Sundar. You may be a tech icon, but even you have limits. Sundar stepped closer. My father died with secrets. I won't. Aryan leaned in, his tone turning cold. And what if I told you your father wasn't the man you think he was? A pause. What do you mean? Aryan looked down at Sundar's shoes. Those shoes may carry memories, but they also carry blood. He turned and walked back to his car, leaving Sundar frozen on the steps. Arjun rushed out moments later. What did he say? Sundar looked at him, eyes shadowed with something heavier than anger. He said Appa wasn't the man we thought he was. Arjun's face tightened. You don't believe him, do you? Sundar didn't answer, because somewhere deep inside, a doubt had been planted. And in that doubt was a question, more terrifying than all the rest. What if his father wasn't just a victim? What if he was part of something darker? Asterisk, the name he never knew's rain came suddenly, as it often did in Chennai. That warm droplets felt like memory, washing over the streets and the rooftop of the hotel where Sundar stood, motionless still, hearing Aryan Wexler's words echo inside his mind. Those shoes may carry memories, but they also carry blood. Back in his suite, he sat alone near the window, the city blurred by rainfall beyond the glass. In his lap lay the old photograph of his father and Aryan outside the textile mill, but now that image had changed in meaning. It wasn't just two men standing together. It was a confrontation frozen in time, a riddle soaked in decades of silence. Paced across the room behind him, agitated, restless. He's trying to rattle you, Sundar. That's what this is. Classic deflection. They're caught, and now they want to rewrite history. Sundar didn't respond right away. He was staring at a small detail in the photo he hadn't noticed before. In the far corner, behind the machinery and faded signage, there was a boy. Thin, barefoot, his clothes torn. He was looking directly at the camera, his eyes hollow, unseen. We need to find out what happened at that mill, Sundar finally said. Not the business side, the human side, the workers, the families. Arjun frowned. How? The mill shut down years ago. Records are gone. Most people moved away. Not everyone, Sundar said quietly. Some stories never leave the soil. The next day, they returned to Thiruvalur, not to the factory, but to the village nearby. They asked shopkeepers, tea stall owners, elders sitting beneath banyan trees. Most shook their heads, unwilling to talk. Some stared at Sundar with guarded expressions, as if he were a ghost from the past dragging buried pain back into the daylight, until they found her name was Parvati. A widow in her 60s, wearing a faded green sari, sitting outside a small temple. When Sundar mentioned the mill, her expression changed. Not surprised, not angry. Just tired? You're his son, aren't you? She asked softly. Sundar knelt before her. You knew my father? Everyone here knew him, she said, voice like a whisper through dry leaves. Mr. Pichai came often, always with a notebook, always asking questions. What kind of questions? Sundar pressed gently .parvati key. I looked at him, and for the first time in days, he saw no judgment, only sadness. He was trying to help us. He saw things no one else did. The beatings, the children forced to work, the girls who never came home. He wanted to expose them, but they warned him. And then he changed. Arjun stepped forward. What do you mean, changed? She hesitated. He stopped coming as often. When he did, he didn't ask questions anymore. He just handed envelopes to the supervisor, never looked us in the eye again. Sundar's stomach twisted. Are you saying he took bribes? Parvati looked down. I don't know. But the fire happened soon after. Fire? Sundar's voice rose slightly. She nodded. In the workers' quarters? 5 huts burned. 2 children died. They said it was electrical. But we all knew. The wind blew through the trees around the temple, and in that silence a heavy truth settled on Sundar's shoulders. Why didn't anyone speak out? Arjun asked. Because those who tried disappeared, Parvati said, her voice barely audible. And my father? Sundar asked. She looked up at him. Your father came one last time after the fire. He looked thinner, weaker. He came to my home late at night. He was crying. He gave me something, told me to keep it safe. Sundar and Arjun exchanged glances. Do you still have it? Sundar asked, his voice almost trembling. Parvati slowly stood, her bones creaking, and motioned for them to follow. Her house was a simple one-room hut with a tin roof and an altar in the corner. She reached behind a clay pot and pulled out a small, rusted tin box. When she opened it, there was only one item inside, a torn piece of paper with a list of names. Handwritten. In their father's handwriting. Sundar held it gently, his eyes scanning the list. There were 8 names. Beside some were notes. Age 10, injured, disappeared, orphaned, saw fire. And next to one name, underlined twice, were the words, key witness, protect at all costs. That name was Shiv Kumar. You know who this is? Sundar asked. Parvati. She nodded slowly. He left years ago. I think he's in Pondicherry now, working as a security guard at the port. Sundar stood, folding the paper carefully. Then that's where we go. The following afternoon, after hours of driving through coastal roads and checking with locals near the port, they finally found him. Shiv Kumar. He was older now, in his 30s, with a slight limp and deep scars on his arms. He looked at Sundar and Arjun with suspicion at first, but when Sundar mentioned his father's name, something shifted in his eyes. They sat on plastic chairs at a tea stall near the docks. The air smelled of salt and diesel. I knew he'd send someone someday, Shiv said, sipping chai. But I didn't think it would be his son. He didn't send us, Sundar said gently. He's gone. Shiv's eyes softened. Then it's time you know the truth. And what he told them changed everything. IV had been 12 when he started working at the mill. His father died in a machine accident the same year. Vortex had promised compensation, but nothing came. One day, Shiv witnessed a fight between Pichai and a man from Vortex's foreign office. It was about documents files that proved Vortex was using illegal child labor and forging audit reports. Your father was brave, Shiv said. But they broke him, threatened your family, said they'd erase his pension, ruin his name. He tried to resist. But when the fire happened, he blamed himself. I think that's when he gave up. But why write down your name? Arjun asked. Hesitated. Because I had the files. I still do. Sundar's eyes widened. What? Shiv looked around and pulled out a small cloth pouch from his bag. Inside were old photographs, file copies, and a cassette tape. I've kept this hidden for 20 years, he said, waiting for the right moment. Your father told me one day the world would want to know, and that day is now. Back at the hotel, Sundar spread out the documents on the table. The evidence was overwhelming. Records of child labor, falsified. Inspections, photos of injuries, letters from Vortex executives. And the tape? The tape was the most damning dot on it. His father's voice could be heard confronting Aryan Wexler. You promised to fix things, Aryan. Now children are dying. Business is never clean, mister. Pichai, you can either help shape the story or be crushed by it. You think money protects you? But truth has a longer memory than gold. Sundar sat back, hand over his mouth, eyes wet. He had finally heard his father's voice again, not as a broken man. Not as someone who gave in, but as someone who had fought until the end and been silenced. Arjun looked at him. What are we going to do? Sundar looked at the evidence spread before them, then at his shoes still worn, still patched. We're going to tell the story he couldn't, he said, He opened his laptop and began to type dot this time. Not a post, not a speech, but a full expose, backed by documents, audio, and testimony. The truth behind the shoes, the summit, the textile mill, and Vortex International dot as he hit send to the investigative journalist he trusted most. He whispered, "This is for you." But just as he closed the laptop, his phone buzzed. Private message from a number he didn't recognize. "If you publish this, we'll make sure the world remembers you as a fraud. We know what your father did, and we know what you've done too." Sundar froze. The storm had only just begun. Asterisk. The threat behind the curtained room fell into an eerie silence as Sundar stared at the message on his phone screen. The words were sharp, threatening, and deeply personal. "If you publish this, we'll make sure the world remembers you as a fraud. We know what your father did, and we know what you've done too." His fingers tightened around the phone, and for the first time in days, the air around him felt heavy, not with grief, but with danger. He had been threatened before. In business, in tech, by competitors, rivals, critics. But this was different. This wasn't about code or strategy. This was about family, legacy, memory, and someone out there, someone powerful was watching his every move. Arjun stepped out from the bathroom, wiping his hands on a towel, but the moment he saw Sundar's face, he stopped cold. What happened? Sundar handed him the phone. Arjun's eyes scanned the message, and his jaw clenched. "They're desperate." "No," Sundar said quietly. "They're scared." He walked over to the balcony, rain still falling softly against the glass doors. He pushed them open, stepped out into the warm night air, and let the wind brush across his face. Beneath them, the city of Pondicherry moved quietly, streetlights flickering, motorbikes buzzing through the lanes, life going on, unaware of the war that had just been declared above. "What do they mean, what you've done too?" Arjun asked from behind. Sundar didn't answer immediately. He was remembering something. Something buried years ago, when he was still building his career. When he was still hungry to prove himself in Silicon Valley, he'd worked on a project one that raised ethical questions. He'd raised concerns internally, but in the end, he hadn't stopped it. He didn't sign off on the deployment, but he also didn't walk away. It wasn't illegal, but it haunted him, and now someone clearly knew about it. "They're trying to use fear," Sundar said at last, turning back. "But we can't back down now." Arjun crossed his arms. "If we publish this, they'll attack us from every side. Defamation, lawsuits, media manipulation. They have the power and the money. Then we'll fight with truth," Sundar said. "Because once the truth is out there, it belongs to everyone." They spent the rest of the night scanning the documents, organizing audio files, formatting timelines. Sundar contacted a small independent investigative team in Delhi One, known for integrity and courage. He sent them everything, and he added a personal message. "If anything happens to me, publish this anyway. The world deserves to know." By dawn, the first wave had begun. A media leak. Someone at Vortex International had caught wind of the investigation. Suddenly, mainstream outlets began receiving anonymous tips claiming that Sundar was using his father's death for personal branding, that the story of the shoes was fabricated for sympathy, that evidence of manipulated photos and altered documents would soon be released. Within hours, hashtags turned against him. Hashtag Shoegate began trending. News anchors debated whether Sundar was hiding behind sentiment to cover up a PR stunt. And yet, something unexpected happened. The public didn't turn instead. People started sharing their own stories of parents who had worked in factories, of shoes that told stories of inherited burdens and quiet resilience. Sundar's original speech from the summit resurfaced again, this time going viral in countries he'd never even visited. One post stood out. A young girl from Colombia, holding a photo of her father's boots, wrote, "My dad worked in the fields every day for 30 years. We couldn't afford new shoes. He died before he could see me graduate. I wore his boots to my ceremony." Thank you, Sundar, for making us feel seen. The world was listening, but Vortex wasn't finished. On the second day, a well-produced video surfaced on social media platforms. A documentary claiming Sundar's father had falsified records during his audit. It featured staged interviews, shadowy figures, and twisted narratives. Within minutes, it had millions of views. The video ended with a dramatic statement. This is not a hero's story. It's a carefully crafted lie. Arjun watched the video with clenched fists. They're trying to bury us. Sundar shook his head. They're trying to rewrite history. But they underestimated how many people remember the truth. Then came the breaking point. An email arrived from a former Vortex employee. Anonymous. Encrypted. It contained internal memos, meeting notes, and a confession from a gig who had recently died in a car accident under suspicious circumstances. One document stood out. Directive. Mere Pichai's audit must be neutralized. Use leverage. Family. Finance. Reputation. Ensure compliance. Do not allow evidence to leave India. Contingency plan approved. Asset Wexler informed. Arjun read it aloud, voice shaking. They used Appa, they crushed him, and now they're trying to do the same to you. Sundar felt a fire inside him now. Not fear. Not doubt. Conviction. He called his team at Google. Not for support, not for help. Just to tell them he'd be off the grid for a few days, and that if any strange reports appeared about him, to ignore them and wait for the truth. He called his wife and told her everything. And then he called a press conference. No glitz. No stage. No branding. Just a single hall in a community center in Chennai, with reporters seated in plastic chairs and one live camera streaming everything. He stepped onto the platform in the same hoodie, the same jeans, and of course, the same patch shoes. And he spoke not about innovation, not about business, but about legacy, about truth, about the silence that had buried his father for decades, and the courage it now demanded from him. We are not defined by our success, Sundar said, voice steady. We are defined by what we do when the truth is inconvenient, when it is dangerous, when it costs us everything. He held up the photograph of his father and Aryan. This is where the lie began. Today, it ends. And then he played the tape. His father's voice echoed through the hall, strong and unbroken. You think money protects you. But truth has a longer memory than gold. Reporters sat stunned. Some in tears. Others already typing furiously. The live stream exploded. Millions watched as Sundar unveiled the full report, released the documents, and provided access to every shred of evidence. He named names. He told the world about the children, the fire, the silence that was forced, and the courage that lived on. And he ended with a line that would be quoted for years. These shoes walked my father to his grave, but they will walk the world to the truth. Outside, protesters began to gather, not against Sundar, but in support, holding banners that read, "Every shoe has a story," and "Truth walks slower, but it never stops." But the story wasn't over, because that evening, as Sundar returned to his hotel, exhausted but free, a courier arrived with a package. No name, no return address. Inside, a single item, a burned, half-melted Vortex employee ID card, and a handwritten note. You found the first secret. But the fire wasn't an accident. Your father wasn't the only one silenced. If you keep digging, be ready, because the last name on that list is still missing. Sundar held the note in his hands, breath caught in his throat, because he remembered now there were 8 names on his father's list, but only 7 had been accounted for. And the last name, the one circled in red, wasn't S-A-I-V. It was someone else. Someone Sundar had forgotten. Until now. Asterisk, the final naming had wrapped itself in silence. But Sundar's heart was anything but still. He stood in the middle of the hotel room, holding the burned Vortex ID card in one hand and the note in the other. The handwriting was trembling, panicked, like it had been scribbled moments before the writer vanished. It wasn't just a warning. It was a key. A key to a door Sundar didn't even realize was still closed. The last name on that list is still missing. He rushed to the table where Arjun was resting, his head tilted back on the chair, eyes barely open, after 3 sleepless nights. Arjun, Sundar said, breath shallow. Give me the list. Appa's original list. Arjun sat up quickly, alarmed. What happened? Sundar opened the folded page, carefully worn from days of handling. His eyes scanned each line, his mind recalling every person they had traced. Shiv Kumar, found. Rekha, found. Now a social worker in TIRUCARP, PALIO, found. Missing a hand but running a bicycle repair shop in Salem. 6 had been identified, and then Sundar saw it. Asterisk, the 8th name, circled in red, underlined once. With a faded ink smudge over part of it. Look closely, he whispered. Asterisk.